All right, I'm going to try and fail to go through this social studies test as fast as I can, but apologies in advance for all my rambling. All right, question number 1. This chart and graph show the number of deaths caused by diseases. Examine them and answer the following 2 questions. All right, before I even look at the chart and graph, I'm going to read the questions. So, which hypothesis is supported by the data in the graph? All right, well, it's telling me to look at the graph, so I can probably ignore the chart for this one. 3 of these are going to be wrong and 1 is going to be right. So only one of these hypotheses is supported. Malaria killed more people than any other disease. No, malaria is right here, and it looks like dysentery / diarrhea killed the most people, which is gross. More people died from pneumonia than from smallpox. More people died from pneumonia than smallpox. That is true. All right, the answer is B. We can be done. Move on to the next one, save some time. Based on the chart above, which disease was most likely to kill you once you contracted it? So we're looking for the thing that's most likely to kill once you've got it. So this column here, percentage killed of those affected, we're looking for the biggest number. So the answer is probably going to be typhoid fever. Once you got that, you had a 1 in 3 chance of dying, it looks like. And if not that, it's going to be pneumonia. That's an option, so the answer is typhoid fever. All right, again, we have a double thing. Look at a map and a timeline, and then answer the following 2 questions. All right, so first question, which I'm going to read before I even look at the timeline or the map. Based on the information above, which factor most likely motivated Nikita Khrushchev to propose a deal to remove the missiles? All right, so that one actually, it's probably going to be in the timeline, but it could also have something to do with the map. And if you read over this timeline, you'll see that President Kennedy, it's starting in the 24th here on the Wednesday, President Kennedy concludes that if the U.S. invades in the next 10 days, Soviets will likely fire at least some of the Cuban missiles at U.S. targets. So Kennedy is thinking about, like, at least a full-on invasion of Cuba is a possibility. And then that Sunday of that week, Khrushchev, the Soviet leader, suggests, you know, a truce. I'll take away the missiles if you promise not to invade. So let's see if any of these answers are going to talk about any of that stuff. He believed there was a reasonable chance that the United States would invade Cuba. Yeah, that seems pretty reasonable. Let's see if any of the other ones are good. He believed the U.S. naval blockade was impenetrable. It doesn't say anything about him believing that any of his ships couldn't get past this blockade. Impenetrable means you can't penetrate it. He didn't trust the information he was receiving from his foreign minister. The foreign minister does lie, but he lies to the Americans. He doesn't lie to the Cubans. Or he doesn't lie to the Soviets. He believed that John F. Kennedy would strike the Soviet Union preemptively. So maybe you know what that word means and maybe you don't, but it seems like we have a pretty good solid answer in A. And preemptively means, well, you can sort of figure it out by looking at the pre part. Pre means before. Preemptive means like you do something before the other guy's going to do it. You think you're going to get into a fight. So before the fight starts, you punch the guy in the face. That's a preemptive punch. And it's not that. It's Kennedy. He doesn't believe it. There's nothing in there that suggests he believes Kennedy would nuke the Soviet Union preemptively. Soviet missiles in Cuba were capable of striking all of the following except, all right, Miami, New York, Los Angeles, or Denver. Miami, New York, Denver, they're all on this map. Los Angeles isn't even on this map. And if you know a little bit about geography, it's in California, which is sort of like off the map over here. About there. So it's got to be Los Angeles, the only one that's not one of the, doesn't appear on the map. Have I been putting the right answers here? I don't think I have. Do a better job, Cohen. Okay. This excerpt is from a speech by Chief Joseph. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce his native name. A Native American tribe from the Pacific Northwest. All right, so before I read this, I'm going to look at the question. The question is, based on the excerpt, which is most likely the reason Chief Joseph pledges to fight no more forever. This is a famous quote. Comes at the very end of this excerpt. And if you don't read it, this is a reasonable answer. The traditions of his tribe compel him to advocate for peace. But there's nothing in here that says like my forefathers, my ancestors, blah, 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 blah. No, it's like all his buddies are dead. The old men are dead. It is the young men who say yes or no, where he sort of mentioned some of his chief friends. Our chiefs are killed. Looking Glass is dead. Tahul Hul Shoot is dead. So there's nothing about traditions. The weather has turned too cold to continue fighting. It does say it is cold and we have no blankets. So that's a maybe. He is biding his time until there is a better opportunity to fight back. Unless he's a super trickster and he's lying about fighting no more forever, that can't be C. So his tribe was beaten decisively in a battle. Decisively means like without any, there's no doubt. He was like definitively, definitely, decisively beaten. And a lot of the things that he talks about in here, this is like a super depressing excerpt of his speech. No one knows, where my people are. Maybe they're freezing to death. I want to see how many of my children I can find. Maybe I'll find them among the dead. This comes from being beaten by the United States Army. It's not like there's a mention of the cold, but there's the whole quote here is about all the ways that his people have died, and it doesn't say that he's beaten decisively in a battle. The only sort of suggestion is this: tell General Howard, who is presumably someone in the United States Army. You have to it's an inference you have to make, but the answer is D. Examine this chart and answer the following 2 questions. All right, so this is about checks and balances. Let's read the questions first. Which of the following actions would not be considered an example of the U.S. Constitution system of checks and balances? So, like, which one of these options wouldn't show up on this chart? All right, so checks and balances, if you look at this chart here, it's like all the different ways that one branch can, like, go against another branch. Can veto is sort of like the key word here. The president can veto laws. They're not all negative, but a lot of the things, like what the Supreme Court can do is basically say no to a law that's been passed by the legislature and signed by the president. So 3 of these are going to be, this is one of those like reverse questions where it says like which one of these actions would not be considered an example. So 3 of them are going to be considered an example. And the ones that are going to be considered an example, if I'm looking at all this stuff, it's probably going to be the negative things that are legit. So the president signs a law written by Congress. That, if I look at checks and balances, the president, he doesn't, that's not on here. So that's probably the right answer. The Senate rejects the president's cabinet appointment. All right, so the Senate is part of the legislative branch. Yeah, executive appointments, that's a cabinet appointment. So this one is a yes. So it can't be B. The Supreme Court strikes down a law passed by Congress and signed by the president. Yep, that's definitely a thing. That's a check and a balance. So it's not B or C. The president vetoes a law written by Congress. Yeah, that's like his number one move. So it's not B, C, or D. So the president signing a law written by Congress isn't really a check and balance. The idea of a check and a balance is to let's get to the next question and see if we can answer that. What is the main reason the U.S. Constitution establishes 3 distinct branches of government? So that each branch can help other branches carry out their duties? Maybe. That seems like kind of a reasonable answer, so we'll say A is a maybe. To ensure that no single branch becomes too powerful? Yeah, that feels right to me. To provide the president with a range of tools to manage the government? No, because this is about all 3 branches. It's not just about the president. So it can't be C. To give each branch a voice in the creation of the nation's laws. That's tricky, but it's the reason it's not right is that word creation here. The Supreme Court doesn't create laws. They can only take the laws that have been written and decide whether or not they're constitutional. They can interpret the laws. They can't create them. So it can't be D. This is a sneaky one. It's either going to be A or B. And the strongest answer to me is B. That the main idea behind checks and balances is that, we were starting this country, and the country before us that we used to be, England, had a king. We didn't like the king. He was too powerful. So we divided up all the power and made it so that no one person or no one branch would have too much power. So the answer is B. The paragraph describes an economic scenario. All right, so the question is, what is the value of Chester's real capital? This is an economics question. They're basically asking if you can figure out what the definition of real capital is. And if you know, great. That makes it easier. But if you don't know what capital is, and not like the capital of Colorado is Denver kind of thing, the economics capital, then you have to do some process of elimination. So some of these are definitely something else. He builds 50 tractors and he sells for $1,000 each. Is real capital like a selling price? That doesn't sound right to me. That real capital is like the price you'd see on a Walmart shelf. I guess I won't eliminate it right now, but it's unlikely to be A. B is 10,000. 10,000 we see here is his profit. And no, 10,000 is profit. Capital is a different term for a different thing. So we know it can't be B. It's probably not A. It's either 40,000 or 50,000 most likely. Well, what is 40,000? Well, he builds 50 tractors. He sells them for $1,000 each. That's 50,000. 50 times 1,000 is 50,000. He makes a profit of 10,000, which means that his expenses that cost him $40,000. He had to pay his workers and buy all the land and do all the stuff. That cost him 40,000. The question is capital like his expenses or the value of all his stuff? And if you can narrow it down to these two, that's pretty solid. If you happen to know that capital is the value of all of the stuff, then it's D. Read the following excerpt and examine the graph below about political trends. All right, so here's a bunch of text. Here's some graph about voter affiliation. Let's read what the question is. Which phrase defines the term demographic as it is used in the passage? All right, so that's nice. If we read the question first, we didn't even have to read all this stuff. We just have to find out where it is in the paragraph. It's right here. There continue to be fundamental differences in the partisan orientation of different demographic groups. And in many cases, these gaps have grown wider in recent years. So maybe you know what partisan means. That's okay if you don't. The key phrase here is demographic groups. Which one of these? This is actually sort of like an RLA question. Can you figure out what this word means from the context? So demographic groups, the relative number of Democrats and Republicans, that seems like a maybe. The makeup of certain categories of people, that sounds pretty strong. Demographic groups, so if you keep reading here, they mention a bunch of different categories: gender, generational, geographic, and educational divides. It's looking pretty, B seems like it's in the lead here. Rising or falling trends, no. Demographic groups, trends and groups don't seem to work together. It sort of works with A, but not with C. Intensity of opinions, that doesn't make any sense at all. So the other way you could figure this out, if you want to pull an RLA, is look at the word itself. Do you know any words that start with demo besides like a demonstration or demolition? Those two words, actually, forget about those two words. What I'm thinking of is democracy. Democracy is a government of people. Demos means people, and graphic is like, here's a graphic. So it's like a graphic of people. It's the groups of people that you're graphing. That's where the word comes from. All right, so the answer is B. Using the information in the graph, decide whether each statement below is true. Oh, a true or false one. Okay, we have to just go through and see if they're true or false. There's really no other way to do this. Among all workers, the unemployment rate is lowest for those with less than a high school diploma. So this is one of those questions that's tricky because of the phrasing of the word. It's like, which not non-miss, they sort of throw it's like which, you know what I'm talking about, even if what I just said made no sense. So the unemployment rate, that's the blue one here, is lowest for those with less than a high school diploma. No, it's highest for those with less than, which makes sense. It's harder to find a job without a diploma. That's why you guys are all here. So this one is going to be false. F. No, I wouldn't say F. I would say A. Probably better. I said A. There we go. Okay, so A is false, B is true. Those with a doctoral degree earn more money than those with a professional degree. All right, so how much money do you make? That's the green one. Those with a doctoral degree earn more money than those with the professional degree. So that one is also false. Professional degree, even though it's sort of like, this one is sort of like a curve there. This one has a little bump in the curve. So I guess you need more school to get a doctorate than a professional degree, but people with professional degrees make more money. That's good to know. In 2017, the average unemployment rate for all workers was 3.6. Yeah, it says it right there. That one is true. So that one's going to be B. Workers with a bachelor degree earn more money than the average worker. So we see the average line here. Bachelor's is here. Yeah, they do make more money. That one is B. True. Unemployment rate for someone with a high school diploma. Ooh, this one is going to require some math. So let's find it. They're looking at unemployment rate, the blue one. High school diploma, that's here, 4.6, is more than 3 times higher than the unemployment rate for someone with a bachelor's degree. Bachelor's is 2.5. So is 4.6 more than 2.5 times 3? No, 2.5 times 3 is 7.5. So this one is false. I feel like that's a complicated. They want you to do some math there. All right. Excerpts from amendments to the Constitution. So we have two famous ones and then one less famous one. This one is about the right of citizens in the United States to vote. If you look here, that's how all of these start. So the question is, what was the main objective of these amendments? I should have read that before I started poking around with the amendments themselves. To extend American citizenships? No, this is all about voting. This one was after the Civil War. Black people can vote. Former slaves can vote. On account of sex, this gave women the right to vote. And this one, a poll tax, is basically this racist tool that they came up with to prevent poor people and poor black people from voting in the South. They basically charged money. You had to pay to vote back in the day in some of the more racist areas to make it so that only wealthy people could vote. So they got rid of that in 1964. So to lower the voting age in presidential elections, no, it doesn't say anything about age, just race and sex and money. To repeal previous amendments which denied certain rights to American citizens. That's a maybe. To extend and protect suffrage to certain groups of people. Okay, so I don't know what the word suffrage means. At least I'm pretending not to know what the word suffrage means. And I guess it's going to depend on whether I think this one, I can support it with the evidence. This is the nitty-gritty here of test-taking skills. Can you find something in here that is going to support conclusively, can like really be evidence to show you that this answer is right? So it says to repeal previous amendments which denied certain rights to American citizens. So they do sort of suggest that like black people they didn't have the right to vote, and women didn't have the right to vote, and poor people couldn't vote in some cases. But to repeal previous amendments, are there amendments that deny? Was there like an amendment that said black people couldn't vote? There isn't really. There's the first 10 amendments, that's the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech, and right to bear arms, and all that stuff. There's nothing in there, or anything between 11 and 15 that says you're denied any rights, and this is restoring them. They just didn't have those rights at any point to begin with. So this one doesn't sit right with me. I think I can't quite support what's going on here with the text. So I'm going to guess that it's D, even though I don't know that suffrage literally means the right to vote. And if I did know that, then it would be very easy, and that's the right answer. After the United States won its independence from England, two opposing political viewpoints dominated the early years of the country. The Democratic Republicans, led by Jefferson in the South, faced off against the Federalists, led by Hamilton in the North. Below, match each phrase with the appropriate political party. All right, so that's the Southern stuff. That's the Northern stuff. And let's see if I knew this already, it would be easy. It's one of those kind of questions where if I had, been paying attention in 9th grade or whatever, maybe it would have stuck with me. But is there any way in here where I can start to use process of elimination? So it looks like there's opposing things here. that 1 and 2 are against each other. This one is in favor of giving each state strong rights, states' rights. This one is sort of like states are okay, but really what we need is a strong national government. These two things are opposed. And these two things are kind of opposed too, that it favored manufacturing and industry, like factories and stuff, and this favored farmers and agriculture, basically, you know, the little guy growing his crops. So maybe you know a little something about Hamilton. He's on the $10 bill. They had that musical about him. Jefferson on the $2 bill, which is a real thing. Also on the nickel, I think. Maybe you know that Thomas Jefferson was Southern. He's a Virginian guy. Maybe you know that Hamilton was sort of based in New York. So, or maybe you don't. Maybe you know that Jefferson owned slaves, and the people who owned slaves were farmers back in the day. So that could sort of help you realize that the Democratic Republicans had to be in favor of farmers because Jefferson was basically a slave-owning farmer. Which means that we know, since these are opposed to each other, we can put B for number 3. That at least gets us half of the way there. So states' rights, strong national government. I don't know. You kind of need to know a little something about these guys. Hamilton is on the $10 bill because he was a big deal in setting up the economy and financial system of the United States, which is like kind of, I don't know if you can sort of smell where this is going, that Hamilton was more of a strong national government guy. He wanted a national bank. He sort of got it, although we don't really have one today. Kind of we do, sort of we don't. But states' rights, which is like keep your bank away from, your national bank away from me, I just want to be farming, that's a Democratic Republican one. So if you can get halfway there and then guess, if you can realize that like 1 and 2 are opposed and 3 and 4 are opposed, and you can get half of the way there, then you're in pretty good shape, even if you don't know the specific history. All right, examine the information below. Following 2 questions. Let's read the questions first. All right, which of the 5 most recent U.S. presidents had the least success sustaining his vetoes? All right, well, that's going to be in this chart here. So who had the most vetoes overridden? So these are the number of vetoes, like I don't like this bill, and then Congress said, too bad, this many times. The biggest one is Reagan. He did it 9 times out of 78 vetoes. But Reagan's not on this list, so let's look at number 2. That would be George W. Bush. He did it 4 times out of 12. That's a pretty terrible batting average. It means that 1 out of every 3 times he vetoed something, he was overruled. Sorry, George W. Bush. You have the least success sustaining your vetoes. All right, which scenario best describes the events that led to a single successful override of a George H.W. Bush veto? So there's nothing in here really that we need to know in the chart. It's just that he was vetoed 44 things and one of them got overridden. They're basically asking, what do you need to override a veto? That seems to be like what the question is. Do you need a majority of the Senate? Do you need a majority of the House? Do you need a majority of both the Senate and the House? Or do you need at least 2/3 of both the Senate and the House? Well, if you read in here, right here, it says requires a 2/3 majority of both houses, and it's even in italics. I am not sure that they would give you this much information on the actual test. You might have to know that, but maybe not. But the answer is D. And maybe you can use some process of elimination to realize that you need more than just one. Like, it can't just be half of Congress. It can't just be the Senate or the House. It has to be both for this veto thing. So it's either going to be C or D, and the answer is up there. It's D. All right, identify the quote that best matches the theme of this painting. Westward, the course of empire takes its way. So that's actually a clue right there. The theme, so we has something to do with westward and the course of empire. And if you look, sort of examine this, it looks like people are going west. I noticed some mountains. That's the only part of the country that has dope mountains is us in the west. And there's like the old wagon train. Like this is way back in the day. People are, look at that guy with a little hat on here saying like, ooh, look at the sunset. It is a beautiful land of opportunity. So this is like a pretty positive, the theme of this is going to be pretty positive, and it's like we're going westward. We're going to the empire is going to make its way west. So let's see what these are about. The first one is about slave-holding states and non-slave-holding states. That I don't see anything to do with slavery in here. Like it may be around, it's sort of like in the background, but not literally in the background. Maybe it's off screen. It's not, this isn't a slave-holding thing. This isn't about the Civil War. No universal selfishness can bring good to all. Communism, that has to do with, that was that question about the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's the Soviet Union. That's like 100 or 150 years later. There's a favorite phrase of frequent use in popular addresses, manifest destiny. It is said to be the manifest destiny of this race to spread over the whole continent, carrying with it its laws, institution, and enterprise. That sounds pretty good. Manifest destiny of this race. Are these all white people? Looks like it. I don't see any native people. I don't see any black people. So, yeah, that's probably going to be C. In a democracy, the majority of citizens capable of exercising the most cruel oppressions upon the minority. Huh. I thought it was going to be C, but now here comes D. No, I still like C. Because this one is about, like, oppressing people, and I don't see a lot of oppression here. This is, like, if you can understand the tone of this. Like, look at this dude waving his hat. Like, that's, I don't see any minority oppression there. So the answer is C. Have I already forgotten to, oh no, I kept doing it. Okay, good. All right, almost done. 3 more. This excerpt is from the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling on racial segregation in the 1896 Plessy v. Ferguson. Okay, what is the main idea of this excerpt? If you read this, this is the most difficult text in this whole test. So what I'm going to do, good test-taking strategy, I'm going to flag this. There's no way to do it in Schoology, but I'm just going to go on to the next one. Because if I run out of time, this is the one I want left unanswered. Because I have a bad, it's unlikely I'm going to get this right. I mean, maybe I'll get it right, but this is really hard stuff. So I'm going to skip it and come back. Which image related to the Spanish-American War is best example of propaganda? All right, so you need to know what propaganda means in order to get this right. And you should know what propaganda means because it will be on the test. They almost always have a propaganda question. And so I just so happen to know propaganda means like when the government is trying to manipulate you and get you excited for things, trying to get you to hate certain things. It's like when the government sort of messes with your brain. Here's a picture of a mustachioed white train conductor. No, he's probably a military guy. The government is not trying to make me feel anything, so it's not A. Ship with a giant American flag. That's pretty good. Maybe I'm supposed to feel patriotic. There's all our young boys on the ship. B is a maybe. C. End the pain, blast Spain with the bald eagle dropping a bomb on an evil-looking snake, which presumably represents Spain. This, I am being manipulated here. This is a slam dunk. This is definitely propaganda. It even says United States Navy, telling you that it comes from the government. That's who's making this. Is D going to be better? No, D just looks like a war map. So maps, I don't feel anything here. No one's trying to manipulate me. This is like a C- answer, maybe a C answer. This is an A+ answer. It's got to be C. All right. Which of the following? The following is the text of the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Ooh, I'm running out of oxygen here. Okay. The power is not delegated to the people of the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. So this is, everything in the Constitution is really hard. This is about as hard as the question 16, except it's a little shorter. So they're asking which legal principle does this amendment discuss? Again, this is a really hard question. It comes at the end, so you don't have to flag it and come back. You can just start working on it. But the way to approach this is process of elimination. Which ones is it definitely not? The power is not, so they're talking about like what the United States government, the federal government, what their powers are. So the powers that aren't given to the United States by this Constitution or prohibited, like the powers that basically aren't even mentioned, they're not given to the states, or they're not given to the federal government, or they're not taken away or prohibited by the government. Those are reserved to the states or the people. So basically the people or the states get to decide things that the federal government, that isn't mentioned in the Constitution about the federal government. So representative democracy, does this have to do with, representative democracy is like electing people. This doesn't have to do with electing people. So it's not B, even though I accidentally pushed it. Separation of powers. That's a maybe. That feels like a little bit of separation of powers, because it's separating the federal government, the United States, from the state government. So that's a maybe. Checks and balances. There was that whole other question about checks and balances, about like being vetoing things and overruling each other, and that had to do with the presidency and the president and the Senate and the House of Representatives and the court. So it's not. There's nothing in here about like any of those people. So it's not checks and balances. It's not representative democracy. It's either federalism, which I don't know what it is, or separations of powers. And if I guess separations of powers, it turns out I'd be wrong. Federalism is like a weird kind of separation of powers between the states and the federal government. What it means is the Constitution says nothing about getting a driver's license, so that's the state's problem. Sometimes they sort of step on each other's feet, like with marijuana. Is something in the federal government. There are laws about marijuana, but there's also state laws, and so there's some like uneasy tension between the states and the federal government in Washington, and that's what federalism is. It's like trying to figure out whose responsibility all this stuff is. Is it the states or is it the federal government? Okay, so that's federalism. You kind of just have to know what that word means, or you'll get that wrong. So here's back to the hardest question. I think the hardest question. We consider the underlying fallacy. So you can approach this a couple of ways. You can read it really slowly. There's a lot of difficult words and difficult language. This was written more than 100 years ago. It's written by the Supreme Court, which is like a bunch of smarty-pants lawyers. Really long sentences. We consider the underlying fallacy, or failure, of the plaintiff's argument to consist in the assumption that the enforced separation of the two races stamps the colored race with a badge of inferiority. All right, so what they're saying here, I think, is that someone made a bad argument. And their bad argument is that if you enforce separation between black people and white people, that means that black people are going to feel inferior. They have a badge of inferiority. And they're saying that's a dumb argument. They're saying basically like whoever argues that separating black people and white people mean that black people are worse, they're wrong. If this be so, it is not by reason of anything found in the Act, but solely because the colored race chooses to put that construction upon it. Basically, like if you want to think you're inferior, that's your problem, black people. The argument also assumes that social prejudices may be overcome by legislation. Basically, this act assumes you can like fight prejudice and racism with laws. And then it says we cannot accept this proposition, which is, I feel the need to like spout off against this. This is famously one of the worst Supreme Court decisions in the history of our country, Plessy versus Ferguson. Equal rights cannot be secured to the Negro except by enforced commingling of the two races. Basically, they're saying it's preposterous. It's stupid to say that like by making white people and black people share the same stuff, you're going to make them equal. So this is, if you get into the weeds here, this is a really nasty, mean, lousy, bad thing. So one of these is going to have to be lousy, dumb, and bad. What is the main idea? It is unreasonable to believe that segregation discriminates against black people or that laws can overcome racial segregation. Yeah, that seems pretty mean to believe that segregation discriminates. Yeah, I mean, everything we know, we lived not in the 60s, but we know about the 60s, and there's a lot of civil rights people arguing just exactly against this, that segregation is discrimination. There's no such thing as separate but equal. So the answer seems like it's probably going to be A. Previous attempts at fairly segregating black people and white people have failed, and new methods ought to be tried. No, that's okay. That's actually not, that's also mean and stupid, but it's not the sort of mean and stupid that's in there. Black people deserve equality under the law, definitely not right, because that's like true and good, and this is dumb and bad. All citizens, black or white, have the right to vote, and that right should be enforced. No, again, this is like another good thing, so it can't be good. It also doesn't say really anything about voting. So the best answer it is unreasonable to believe that segregation discriminates against black people or that laws can overcome racial segregation. All right, that's it. That's all of it. I'm done. Thank you for your endurance. Good luck.